Google Maps can guide you to a coffee shop that shut down years ago, but it can also glide right past an entire town that disappeared in plain sight. In southern Louisiana, there are places where the street names still exist, but the neighborhood doesn't. Some were erased by a buyout. Some sank from underneath. Some were wiped out in a single night. So here's the question. Which town is preserved on Street View like nothing ever happened? And which one vanished so completely it survives only as a name on a levee diagram? Today, come with me as we explore 11 ghost towns in southern Louisiana. Let's start right now. Shed number 11. Torras. In the far northeast corner of Point Coupe Parish, it can feel like a place the map forgot. You are close to the Mississippi and the tangled old river channels, and somewhere along what used to be the Texas and Pacific Railroad line, there was a town called Torras. It showed up around 1902, named for Joseph Torras, a businessman from Barcelona. A rail stop plus river access could turn low ground into opportunity. Torras was small, but it worked. And it lived right next to a levee, that thin promise between ordinary life and a river that never stops pushing. On May 1st, 1912, the promise snapped. The levee failed by Torras, and early reports put the gap at about 400 feet. The break widened fast, and the water did not just spread, it took over. Roughly 17,000 people were forced to evacuate across the parish, and more than 12,000 were left without homes. People later said the flood's reach was visible even from Baton Rouge's capital. One tear in a wall of dirt and the whole region changes. The creepiest part is how people tried to make sense of it. One story says some residents refused to leave until the rising water touched the base of a statue of the Virgin Mary, like they needed a final sign before they let go of everything familiar. Torras tried to come back, but it never really got its footing. Routes shifted, the railroad moved on, and the town faded out. Today there are no buildings to show you where Main Street would have been. The name survives mostly as a label on levee system documents, like a ghost signature in engineering ink. If you go looking, go carefully. Expect private land, levee access rules, heat, bugs, and patchy signal. Bring water, respect signs, and do not expect a postcard view. Torras is not a place you visit. It is a place you imagine. And the next town on our list vanishes in a totally different way. Not from water coming in, but from the ground giving up underneath. Number 10. Bayou Corne Down in Assumption Parish, right off Louisiana Highway 70, there used to be a little pocket of life along the water called Bayou Corne, not a downtown kind of place. More like camps, fishing spots, small homes tucked close to the bayou, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knows whose truck is whose, and the street names sound like a menu: Gumbo Street, Jambalaya, Crawfish Stew. It feels funny, until you realize how this place disappeared. In the summer of 2012, people started noticing something that did not belong. Bubbles. Not the harmless kind either. Big patches of gas burping up through the bayou like the water was breathing wrong. Some folks talked about chemical smells. Others said the ground felt like it was humming. At one point, they were logging a lot of little tremors, sometimes a dozen in a day, and then you get that creeping thought, the one you cannot shake. If the bayou is bubbling, what is it trying to tell you? On August 3rd, 2012, the answer showed up. The ground basically opened. What began as a muddy hole, almost like a weird slurry pond, turned into a full sinkhole. Early descriptions compared the first break to something about the size of a tennis court, but it did not stay small. Officials ordered an evacuation that same day, affecting around 350 people. Imagine being told to leave your home because the earth underneath it is no longer trustworthy. And here is the part that feels like a glitch in reality. In real life, you drive toward Gumbo Street and you hit warnings. Keep out. Cameras, barriers. But online, Google Street View is stuck back in 2008. So you can walk the road like nothing ever happened. Like the homes are still there and the bayou is still just a bayou. It is a time capsule you can scroll through. Over the next few years, buyouts happened, houses got purchased and emptied, and the community thinned out until it felt like the place had been erased politely, one family at a time. Today, the sinkhole looks more like a strange lake behind berms, and the neighborhood is mostly silence. If you ever go looking, do not treat it like a spooky field trip. Respect the signs, stay out of restricted areas, and remember this was not a ghost story. It was a real neighborhood, and the next place on our list fades away in a slower, crueler way. Not from one sudden collapse, but from land disappearing year by year. Number 9. Île de Jean Charles. If you zoom in on southern Louisiana, your eyes hit a lot of blue and green, and it is easy to miss this place. Île de Jean Charles does not look like a town. It looks like a thin strip of land with one lonely road cutting through water. One way in, one way out. Island Road. On the map, you can scroll right past it. Back in the mid-1900s, people described the island as wide enough to feel like real ground, not just a ribbon. Families fished and trapped, neighbors waved from porches, and boats were parked like cars. In the early 2000s, there were still close to 300 people here, the kind of community where everyone knows everyone. Then the island started shrinking in a way that is not loud, just relentless. Since around 1955, it is often described as having lost about 98% of its land. Not half, not most, almost all. Marsh turns into open water, and what used to be over there becomes gone. The island starts to feel like a road floating between two ponds. And that road, the thing meant to connect you, becomes the scariest part. When storms roll in, you are not just worried about your roof. You are wondering if your only exit will still be there tomorrow. Hurricane Ida in 2021 pushed that fear into reality. Reports said more than half the homes were destroyed. After that, the question was not, how do we rebuild? It was, how many times can we rebuild before we admit the island is leaving? So a resettlement plan was funded, tens of millions of dollars, to build a new isle about 40 miles inland. Some families moved, a few stayed, because leaving is not just moving. It is leaving memories, traditions, and the exact bend in the bayou where your life makes sense. If you visit, be respectful. This is not a haunted attraction. It is a living goodbye. Next up, a town that dies for a different reason. The work dries up and the lights go out. Number 8, Morley is one of those names that can slip right past you on a map. You are in West Baton Rouge Parish, out near Brusley, surrounded by swamp, canals, and flat green that all looks the same if you do not know what you are searching for. And that is the trick. Morley was never built to be famous. It was built to work. Back in 1907, a lumberman named H.T. Morley came down from Michigan and set up a cypress mill on land his family owned, something like 17,000 acres. Within a couple of years, the mill was running and a whole little company town grew up around it like a campfire draws people in. By 1920, Morley had 419 residents living in 132 houses. For a swamp town, that is a real place. It had a general store, a post office, even a movie theater, plus the everyday stuff that makes life feel normal: a school, a barber, a butcher, a doctor, a dance hall. Trains from the Texas and Pacific line cut right through it. And out in the swamp, there were miles of logging rail, hauling trees back to the mill. People said the whistle could be heard all the way to Brusley. Here's the part that sounds almost unreal now. Workers used company money, little brass tokens, 10 cents, 20 cents, 50 cents, like Morley was its own tiny country in the trees. But the swamp is not sentimental, and neither is the lumber business. The cypress did not grow back fast enough for the appetite of a mill that could push out around 50,000 board feet a day. Floods hit the area hard in the early 1900s, and by the 1920s, the timber was thinning. Then in 1927, the mill shut down. And when the work died, Morley died with it. People left because there was nothing to stay for, no jobs, no reason, no town. Today, you are not going to find a main street lined with ruins. The swamp swallowed most of the evidence. The strange thing is, the name Morley still shows up, but as Morley Marina, opened decades later along the Intracoastal Waterway. So the map remembers the boats. more than it remembers the town. If you go looking, be smart. A lot of the area is private, and the real story is in the silence, the water, the flat horizon. And the next place on our list vanishes in a different way, when a vital connection breaks and the river country lets go. Number 7. Atchafalaya. Atchafalaya is a name most people connect to the swamp, not a town. But there really was a small community called Atchafalaya in St. Martin Parish, sitting on the west bank of the Atchafalaya River, just north of I-10 and a few miles above Butte-La Rose. If you are driving through, you can pass the bridges and water and never realize you are skimming the edge of a place that used to have neighbors, routines, and a mailbox with a real address. Back when it was alive, Atchafalaya was a river people kind of town. Folks lived off the basin, fishing, trapping, working with whatever the water and woods could give. Sources talk about roughly 300 residents at its peak. Then in 1908, the railroad arrived. Southern Pacific running a line between Baton Rouge and Lafayette. That kind of connection matters in a swamp. It is not just travel. It is supplies, jobs, and a reason for a town to stick. But the same landscape that feeds you can also cut you off. The turning point was the Great Flood of 1927. The flood damaged the railroad bridge, and not long after the line was abandoned. When your main link to the outside world disappears, a small town does not get a second chance. People drifted away year by year, and by the time big flood control systems and levees reshaped the basin in the decades that followed, life out there only got harder for anyone trying to stay. The most haunting detail is that Atchafalaya did not vanish in one dramatic moment. It thinned, it emptied. The last resident reportedly left in 1959. One story says the final holdout was a beekeeper hanging on for swamp gold, honey pulled from a place most people only see from a highway. Today, there are no obvious ruins to walk through. The town is basically gone. What is left is the feeling, water, trees, and that quiet stretch near exit 121 where the world looks wide open but the history is hidden under green. And the next place on our list disappears for a different reason. Not from lost roads or rising water, but from what moved into the air and soil while people were still living there. Number 6. Mossville. Mossville sits in Calcasieu Parish, squeezed between Sulphur and Westlake, right on the edge of the Lake Charles Industrial Zone. On a map, it still looks like a normal place, a few roads, a few names, but in real life, parts of it feel like someone turned the neighborhood volume down until it almost hit zero. This community goes way back. It was founded by formerly enslaved people generations ago, and for a long time it was the kind of place that took care of itself: churches, school, family land, porch life, everybody connected. People talk about Mossville having more than 600 residents at one point. Even in the late 1990s, there were still hundreds of people here, a real community, not a headline. Then the plants kept coming. The chemical and petrochemical complex around Westlake grew closer and closer, and Mossville ended up living right next to it. The turning point for a lot of folks came in the late 1990s. Investigations looked at dioxin exposure, and public health reporting described levels in tested residents that raised alarms compared to a comparison group. That is the moment when the worry stops being a vague, "the air smells weird," and turns into, "what is getting into our bodies?" After that, the story shifts from living to leaving. In 2013, a major buyout offer was put on the table tied to expansion plans nearby. Hundreds of properties targeted. The program was structured. The appraisals, a big bump added on top, moving costs, incentives. On paper, it sounds like help. In real life, it can feel like a slow eraser. One family takes the deal, then another, and suddenly the street has more empty lots than voices. One detail that sticks with people is how normal landmarks turn strange. A church with a chain across the entrance. A school building that once held kids, now used as an office for the company next door. When that happens, it does not feel like a town moving forward. It feels like a town being replaced. If you go near Mossville, be respectful. Stick to public roads. Do not treat it like a spooky stop. This is not a legend. It is a community that got pushed out, one quiet decision at a time. And the next place on our list shows another kind of disappearance, where a whole town gets bought up and wiped clean. Number 5, Good Hope. Good Hope used to sit on the east bank of the Mississippi in St. Charles Parish, tucked between New Sarpy and Norco. If you pull up a map now, you will mostly see Norco and industry. That is the point. Good Hope did not collapse in a storm. It got erased. Back in the 1920s and 30s, this was a real river town. A post office opened in December 1922. A big tank terminal went in on about 77 acres. People called it a wonder town because things grew fast. By the early 1930s, families pushed for a school, and a school building was funded and opened in 1931. In the good years, there were stores, a hotel, a bank, even a train depot. There was enough pride and routine here that a little paper called the Good Hope News circulated for a while. Local histories talk about roughly 350 residents, the kind of number that means you had neighbors, not just workers. And then the story flips. Starting around the early 1970s, a refinery operation expanded into the area. At first, it was just buying a house here, a property there. Then it became the pattern. In 1983, the buyout went all the way. The refinery purchased the remaining residential and commercial property so it could expand. Imagine watching your town turn into a checklist, one deed at a time, one moving truck at a time. Here is a detail that makes the past feel close. A local story remembers a train derailment that spilled tar, and kids actually cut pieces of it and chewed it like gum. That is how normal life was here. Not famous, just human. By the time Good Hope was officially absorbed into Norco in 2000, the town was already gone in spirit. Today, the population is basically zero. If you go looking, treat it like an industrial edge, not an abandoned playground. Stay on public roads, respect fences, and let the silence do the talking. Next up is a place that disappears for a different reason. Not industry buyouts, but public planning that moved an entire community off the map. Number 4, Fazendeville. Fazendeville is one of the strangest missing towns in South Louisiana because nothing happened to it in the usual way. No single hurricane wiped it out. No mill shut down. It was removed on purpose. It sat in St. Bernard Parish, right where you visit today for Chalmette Battlefield, basically between the monument and the National Cemetery. If you pull up Google Maps now, you will see the battlefield and the graves and a lot of open grass. What you will not see is the neighborhood that used to live in that exact space. Fazendeville started in 1867. The land was inherited by Jean-Pierre Fazend, a free man of color, and after the Civil War, he divided it up and sold lots to formerly enslaved families from nearby plantations. Over time, it grew into what locals called the Village, a one-road community with homes lined along Fazendeville Road. People built a church, held meetings, raised kids, made it a real place. Sources describe more than 200 residents at its height. It was small, but it was theirs. Then the story turns in the 1960s. Officials wanted the battlefield area to look like a single historic landscape, and Fazendeville did not fit that picture. Plans moved forward, laws were signed, condemnation started. In November 1964, the road was closed to the public. By 1966, the remaining structures were moved or bulldozed. The part that hits hardest is how uneven it was. Local accounts say new homes in St. Bernard were running around $16,000, while families in Fazendeville were getting closer to $6,000 for their houses. That is not a fresh start. That is a shove. And there are stories that make it feel brutally personal. One report tells of a family driving back from California to collect their belongings, getting into a serious wreck, and their house being torn down with their things still inside. Imagine losing your town, then losing your chance to even say goodbye properly. Today you can stand on that quiet grass and feel nothing until you realize that nothing is the point. Fazendeville is a town replaced by scenery. And the next place on our list disappears the opposite way. No bulldozers, just water and erosion slowly pulling the ground out from under everything. Number 3, Burrwood. Burrwood is way down at the very tip of the Mississippi River's Birdfoot Delta in Plaquemines Parish near Southwest Pass, where big ships line up to enter the river from the Gulf. On Google Maps, it barely looks like a place. Mostly water, mud, and shifting marsh. The name feels more like a label floating over blue than a town you could ever drive through. But Burrwood was real and it was busy. This was never a cute little Main Street town. It was more like a working outpost, kept alive because the river is the economy. The Army Corps of Engineers used Burrwood as a base for dredging and building jetties to keep the shipping channel open. At its peak, sources say as many as about 1,000 people were here. That number sounds wild until you picture what it took to run equipment, move crews, keep boats going, and hold a foothold in a place that wants to sink. And here is the twist. Burrwood was not just a work camp. It also became a kind of lookout. During World War II, a naval section base was built there in 1941 to watch traffic and threats offshore. Around the same period, the Weather Bureau opened an office there in 1942. Think about that. A ghost town now, but back then it was important enough to track the sky, the sea, and the river right at the edge of the country. Then the clock started running out. By the mid-1960s, the Weather Bureau office was moved to Boothville. Hurricanes kept coming. Betsy in 1965 passed close enough to remind everyone how exposed that delta really is. And the slow killer never stopped. Erosion and subsidence. The land kept slipping away, turning solid ground into wet ground, then into open water. Today, Burrwood is basically gone. No neighborhood to explore, no ruins to pose next to. The most honest way to show it is from above, or from the water, with old photos and maps layered over the satellite view, because Burrwood is the kind of place that disappears without a dramatic goodbye. It just gets quietly reclaimed. And the next place on our title list takes that same idea and turns it historic. A settlement at the mouth of the river that did not just fade, it had to move, because the Gulf and the storms would not stop coming. Number 2. La Balize. La Balize was never the kind of town you build and expect to last. It sat at the mouth of the Mississippi River, out on that shifting Birdfoot Delta where the river meets the Gulf and the ground feels borrowed. On a modern map, it is the kind of place that looks like water and mud with a few labels. If you do not already know the name, you would never guess a community once lived out there. But for a long time, La Balize mattered. It was basically a river checkpoint, a place tied to one job, getting ships safely into the Mississippi and up toward New Orleans. Pilots, fishermen, their families, people whose whole routine depended on the channel, the current, and whatever the weather decided to do that week. The name itself means a sea mark, a navigation marker. In the early 1700s, the French even put up a wooden tower around 62 feet tall, like an early lighthouse just to guide vessels in. Here's the twist that makes La Balize feel unreal. This town did not just flood and rebuild. It had to move because the river mouth kept changing. Storms tore it up again and again through the 1700s and 1800s. And when the main channel shifted, the community followed the water like it was chasing its own shadow. By the mid-1800s, the Balize settlement had already been pushed toward Southwest Pass. Then came the hard stop. In September 1860, a major hurricane and storm surge hammered the area, and La Balize was devastated again. That was the moment people finally decided they were done trying to live on a moving edge. They relocated upriver, and what became Pilot Town grew about 5 miles away. Even after the move, later storms kept erasing whatever scraps were left behind. Today, there is no main street to explore, no cute ruins. The best way to see La Balize is by layering old names over the modern delta and watching how the river redraws the world. It is a ghost town that vanished because the ground never agreed to be land. And next on our list is a different kind of disappearance. Not a slow relocation. One violent day, one coastal community, and a storm that left a scar people still talk about. Number 1. Cheniere Caminada. Cheniere Caminada sat on the coast of Jefferson Parish, just west of Grand Isle, on one of those thin, higher strips of land people call a cheniere. On Google Maps today, it is easy to miss. You see Highway 1, marsh, water, and you would never guess there used to be a real community there, a working fishing village that helped feed New Orleans. Before everything changed, this place had a pulse. Roughly 1,400 to 1,500 people lived here, many tied to fishing and oysters. Life was simple and a little fragile. There were no wells, so families relied on rainwater collected and stored in cisterns. Like the sky was part of the plumbing. It was isolated, but it worked. Until one night it did not. In late September 1893, a hurricane moved in from the Caribbean and into the Gulf. By the morning of October 2nd, it hit hard. Estimates describe winds around 130 miles an hour and a storm surge somewhere in the mid to high teens, tall enough to turn that strip of land into open water. The numbers that follow do not feel real. NOAA's history notes about 779 people in Cheniere, Caminada, died out of roughly 1,471 residents. More than half the town gone in one event. Accounts describe the place as almost completely flattened. What stays with you is how fast a normal world can become unrecognizable. After the storm, rescue boats brought water, medicine, ice, supplies. People searched through wreckage that used to be porches and kitchens. Even the cemetery was overwhelmed, graves disturbed, markers shifted, the ground itself refusing to hold still. And here's the eerie part today. You can drive near the area and find a small cemetery along Highway 1. There are cracked tombs, sinking ground, and a dead oak nearby, like the landscape never fully recovered its breath. It is not a haunted attraction. It is a reminder sitting in plain sight. Cheniere Caminada is the kind of story that makes you respect the Gulf, not in a dramatic movie way, in a quiet, personal way. Because sometimes a town does not fade out slowly. Sometimes one night rewrites the map, and the only thing left is memory and a few names in the sand. These 11 places might look like faint labels or empty blue space on Google Maps, but in real life they were once full of people and everyday routines. Some vanished in a single night of storm surge. Some were swallowed slowly from underneath. Some were bought out and erased so neatly it feels like they never existed at all. So let me ask you this, if you could go back and visit just one spot on this list, which one would you choose and why? If you want more videos about places you can pass without noticing, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment so I can make part 2.